this morning and today's program, and also to the Atlantic Foundation, who is supporting my visit here. I'm really delighted to be with my co-panelists and to be with all of you. Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media regardless of frontiers. And I bet many of you are familiar with the UDHR and have read those words before. I was reminded of an essay I wrote quite some time ago when a colleague of mine in a public forum recently stated that this particular essay was the first time that anyone had directly claimed in a publication that the internet itself was a human right. Now, I'm not sure that it was the first time, but this was 2 decades ago, and it was probably one of the first times amongst the collection of such publications. So 2 decades ago, I wrote an essay entitled, "Can the Internet Be a Human Right?" And the title of the essay is a question, but as I reread the essay itself, I realized that I had answered that question for myself at that time in the affirmative. Now, right now I am charitably middle-aged, Allison, I don't know. But 2 decades ago, I was a very young scholar, and when I reread this essay, you know, I use German, Latin, and French in the first few paragraphs. I do not speak or read German, Latin, or French. You get the point. I was sort of just getting started in sort of my sense of what scholarship looked like. But one of the things as I reread this essay that I was impressed with was my claim in this material that access to the internet itself is itself a human right. And that's essentially looking for the reciprocal claims of the UDHR for being able to seek, receive, and impart information, and adding to that the realization that the internet today is foundationally the mechanism with which we do that kind of act, beyond when we are in person doing it like we are today in this forum. When I was enthusiastic a couple decades ago about how the internet could be in and of itself a human right, if we come to today, my question for us all is, has the bloom fallen off that rose? And we were hearing, I think, in every comments made by all four of my distinguished partners here on the dais, that there is at best a Janus-faced nature to the internet today, that we are balancing multiple equities, that the statistics that you were sharing about the online gender-based violence that is being perpetrated on people across the planet is really sobering, is the best I could say about it. So in the nature of this kind of multiple equities, today, would we want to challenge the notion that the internet itself could be a human right, that access to the internet is required if we wish to be able to seek, impart, and receive information? And actually what I want to argue this morning is that what it is that the designs of the platforms on the internet, the social media platforms that we've already heard about, and the AI platforms that also have been mentioned, are the part of the problem. And it is that those platforms and systems that are no longer something that I think the UDHR would contemplate as part of a human rights-based approach to informational exchange. And I want to illustrate this first with a case that I personally was quite involved in, which is the case of Myanmar. So in 2018, the UN established that Facebook was used in Myanmar to incite hate and offline violence against the Rohingya people. And I probably don't need to mention to this audience, but the Rohingya people is a ethno-linguistic minority population, Muslim religious minority population in Myanmar. The UN had already established that the military was engaged in genocide against this minority population and community, and the UN Special Rapporteur explicitly called out Facebook as an instrument towards that genocide.
I mean, pause to think about that. That's really quite extraordinary. The United Nations essentially pointing a finger at a social media platform and saying, you are part of a genocide. It wasn't a good look for Facebook or Meta, and so they actually approached me during the run-up to the 2020 election and asked if I might be a partner with them to try to flag, track, and monitor dis and misinformation, electoral irregularities, and hate speech on Facebook during the 2020 election. Now, it's not just about Facebook, but at the time, at least in Myanmar, the internet was Facebook. And this is because of a program that they run called Zero Rating or Free Basics. And so Zero Rating or Free Basics basically means that for the people of Myanmar at the time, Facebook was free. But if you wanted to do other stuff on the internet, you had to pay for data. And I called this in an essay I wrote about 8 years ago, a walled garden. And I'm going to read a little bit from that essay. I guess I'm reusing some old material. Sorry about that. But it's just a metaphor for what I think that Meta at the time was doing. I stroll the gardens of this virtual garden along with all of my best friends. I chat with my buddies, play games, shop the many concessions, or engage even in serious activities around politics or education. My friends all love the garden, and so do I, spending hours a day delighting within its walled confines. All the while, the proprietors are monitoring every aside I make to a friend or lingering glance I place on a storefront window. The proprietors are well-meaning enough, but they realize someone has to pay for all the costs associated with the grounds. They portfoliolize my asides and my glances and sell them to storefront managers who can use the information to personalize my shopping options, constraining my experience to match their calculation of my interests. We feel free in our choices as we linger on the grounds, though of course its well-planned architecture is not without influences. The managers had a brilliant new idea. Free transportation for the world's less privileged directly to the garden gates, as long as you agree to saunter even briefly within its confines. At the entrance gates, these newcomers are welcomed freely and they stream in. But when it comes time to exit, to everyone's surprise, they've placed ticket booths. It was free to enter, now they pay to leave. There's two, I think, important things about the design of these platforms that is not because Facebook or Meta or X or TikTok or WeChat is debased or depraved. It's simply a business model. And it is a economy of surveillance and engagement. So when Facebook, if we continue to just use them as an example, surveil me as to my choices for the sandwich I eat for lunch. It is not due to a debased interest in my love of roast beef. It is simply that they want to sell that choice onto a lunch meat company. And so that motivates them to find out what I'm eating for lunch. And then it further motivates them to elevate information that's going to engage me and keep me on platform. It's the engagement part that creates a platform that wishes to bring up mis and disinformation, to highlight hate speech or problematic speech, and to indeed create silos. I think yeah, that create the strongest opportunities for rights inflicting content online. So fast forward today to Myanmar. Meta has been, Facebook has actually been banned in Myanmar, as has most social media platforms, because after the 2020 election in February of 2021, the military junta took control of the country, destroyed the democratic process, and to this day are in control, perpetrating human rights abuses and civil rights abuses against the democracy programs that are in country. So it's a little rich that a platform that was cognizant of human rights abuses pre the military coup would be the one that the military junta would choose to ban. Meanwhile, Meta has dismantled its content moderations programs globally. Twitter is a hellscape of harmful content, but Jimmy Kimmel is back on TV last night, I think. Did anyone see it? I didn't see it, but some people? Was it good? Okay. So the UDHR may still purposefully affirm this right to receive, seek, and impart information and ideas. But in the presence of a designed internet world that is about surveillance and engagement, is that a rights affirming world? Is the internet in that instance a right itself, as I believe 20 years ago, naively? Or is there a possibility for a new design of the internet, one that actually harkens back to the original design aesthetics of the John Perry Barlows and David Clarks back even before I wrote that essay 2 decades ago? And if that new design is possible, then are we here able to move forward to put it in place? Thank you very much. I didn't know that about Google today, but it's clear that censorship, everyone loves it these days somehow. Like it's happening certainly in this country as a program of the left and the right. We were discussing that earlier. And I'll just quickly like add one additional comment to the question about who is responsible. And I was interested that I think the question asker said the user, the developer, or the platform. But some of our answers contemplated a role of governments, regulatory bodies, and multinational authorities even. And there's a number of governance models that are out there. The World Wide Web Foundation is one of them that generally has sort of a three-legged stool of governance that includes nation states and multilateral organizations, platforms, and users all coming together in ways that will, hopefully ensure that AI and social media platforms are responsive to sort of the human rights concerns that we have, the concerns about gender-based violence and other areas where we know that the internet is not doing what we think is best, but also responsive to over censorship that I think from a rights-based approach, we would also find abhorrent. I think that sort of three-part approach and some of the governance models that have been developed could be quite effective, but all of them require political will, and I'm not sure where we're going to find that political will yet unless we all work together to try to develop it. I think we have to, well, I'm going to respond to the questions about how we reconsider education in the face of AI and how we can ensure that human rights can be ensured with AI, especially amongst marginalized populations. And I'm going to answer by saying that we really need to offer ourselves some moments of grace as we confront the quickest, fastest deployment of a new technology in the history of essentially technologies on this planet. Nothing has ever been used as fast. Nothing is moving as fast. The pace at which this set of technologies is developing and changing is astronomical. So we don't have an answer as to how we reconsider education in the face of AI, or how AI should best and ethically be used by human rights organizations yet. We don't have the answer because it's just moving so fast. The answer is not available, but processes are available. So those processes must bring together stakeholders in consultative ways. We must find leverage with the big tech platforms who are creating these new AIs. We must find leverage. And then we must ensure that these AIs are good for education and human rights and all the other SDGs that we are, here worried about.
I think I just want to say ditto to what Michael just said. But just I'll finish just briefly on these 2 points because they're really important, interesting one. On the data question, I think you raise a really significant issue with data, because data is also a form of surveillance. So from the, I mentioned, work that my colleagues are doing, there are, really strict ethical guidelines for de-anonymized data. There are technological solutions to that, but I think it's an ongoing and really live issue and something we need to take care of, noting that a lot of the bad things that we have been talking about are fueled by data, are personal information. And when you get to biometrics, when you're talking about facial recognition technology, it's even more sensitive and even more significant. So one thing with that, it's if you're talking about university research, it's that really strong ethical frameworks around data. Like we've got a lot of processes at our university. When you're talking about other technologies and data collection, like facial recognition technology is a good example from Australia and other countries around the world that are really rolling it out in policing. The sensitivity of that data that's collected, we need strong regulation around that, and we're yet to have that. So that's the first thing. The second one, the education question, is a really, really important one, and it's not just students. Obviously, it's students, it's people in students in universities. It's also people in professions. So we've done quite a bit of work with legal practitioners, and I had very interesting conversations with the Chief Justice of South Australia, who's now looking at that, at how we use generative AI, what the impact of that is. And I think, echoing, I'm going to steal from Michael and giving us grace, it requires really thoughtful conversations. We need to understand what's happening to our cognition, and those studies are starting to emerge. So what happens if you're just getting information, which can be an incredibly powerful thing, but what does it do to your abilities of critical analysis? And I know what it does to mine, and I can't come up with inventive policy solutions to some of these really complex problems that we're facing without that critical analysis. So I think it's really important to work with the technology. So students who are using it's really understanding how, and we're seeing some really good examples globally of how teachers are working with students who are looking to use AI. So it requires rethinking that, and it does require quick rethinking, but it needs to be a thoughtful process. So I'll finish because I'm pretty sure I'm at a minute, but one thing I did want to say is that we do have a really strong regulatory framework that's currently being rolled out across the EU, and I don't think we can forget that. So we've spoken about the absence of a lot of regulation. There's an example. There are a lot of flaws with that process. So I'm not saying it's a perfect piece of legislation, but we're about to see over the immediate term what it looks like when you have red lines. The Act has particular uses of AI technology that it is banning. So we're about to see what strong regulation that is stacked on European Convention on Human Rights, what that's going to look like. So we are moving quickly. There is a lot to learn, but we're also seeing some really good examples that we're going to be able to work with.